Marcus Chen had always been an early riser, but this morning felt different. The small frontier colony of Haven's Rest was still wrapped in the pre-dawn darkness when he stepped out of his modest dwelling, coffee mug in hand. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of the indigenous purple grass that covered the rolling hills beyond the settlement's perimeter. Haven's Rest wasn't much to look at, just 43 families who had pooled their resources to buy a plot of land on this backwater planet in the Outer Rim territories. No strategic value, no precious minerals, no trade routes. Just a quiet place where humans could live simple lives away from the chaos of the core worlds. Marcus liked it that way. After 15 years serving in the Terran Defense Corps, he had seen enough excitement to last several lifetimes. The settlement's central square was empty except for the automated maintenance drones quietly tending to the small garden that served as their community center. Marcus walked past the simple buildings, the general store, the communications hub, the small clinic, all built from the same prefabricated materials that had been shipped in when they first arrived 3 years ago. Nothing fancy, but it was home. He was heading toward his favorite spot, a small outcropping of rocks about half a mile from the settlement, when he saw it. At first, Marcus thought his eyes were playing tricks on him in the dim light. Something large and dark was perched on his usual sitting spot, silhouetted against the slowly brightening sky. As he got closer, his steps slowed and his breath caught in his throat. It was a dragon. Not the mythical creatures from old Earth legends, but one of the draconic species that the Galactic Council had made contact with nearly a century ago. Marcus had seen them in news feeds and military briefings, but never in person. This one was enormous, easily 30 feet from snout to tail, with scales that seemed to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it. Its wings were folded against its back, and its long neck was curved in a graceful S shape as it gazed out over the landscape. Most humans would have turned around and run back to the settlement to report the alien presence. The draconic species were known to be isolationists, rarely venturing into human space, and, when they did, it usually meant trouble. They were also known to be incredibly powerful, both physically and technologically. A single draconic ship could level a small city. But Marcus had always been curious rather than fearful, and something about the creature's posture struck him as melancholy rather than threatening. It wasn't the pose of a predator or conqueror. It looked almost lonely. Marcus approached slowly, making no effort to hide his footsteps. The dragon's head turned toward him, revealing eyes like molten gold that seemed to hold depths of intelligence and age that made Marcus feel like a child. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the 30 feet of purple grass that separated them. "Good morning," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Beautiful sunrise, isn't it?" The dragon's head tilted slightly, a gesture that seemed almost curious. When it spoke, its voice was like distant thunder, deep and resonant, but the words were in perfect standard Galactic. "You are not afraid." "Should I be?" Marcus asked, taking a few steps closer. "You don't seem particularly threatening at the moment. Mostly you just look like you could use some company." A sound that might have been laughter rumbled from the dragon's chest. "Your species continues to surprise me. I have been watching your settlement for several days, and this is not the reaction I expected." "Well, we're pretty boring here in Haven's Rest," Marcus said with a shrug. "Maybe you caught us on a good day." He held up his coffee mug. "Speaking of which, would you like some coffee?" "I was about to brew a fresh pot anyway." The dragon's massive head drew back slightly, and those golden eyes narrowed. "You offer me refreshment? Why not? You look like you could use it. And I'm not going to be able to enjoy my morning routine with you sitting there looking all brooding and mysterious. Might as well make the best of it." For a long moment, the dragon said nothing. Then, with a movement that was surprisingly graceful for such a large creature, it settled more comfortably on the rocks. "I accept your offer, human. Though I should warn you that my dietary requirements may differ from yours." "Coffee's coffee," Marcus said with a grin. "Give me a few minutes." He jogged back to the settlement, his mind racing. This was definitely not how he had planned to spend his morning, but stranger things had happened in his life. Well, not much stranger, but still. He quickly gathered what he needed from his kitchen, his camping coffee setup, extra cups, and, on impulse, some of the pastries that his neighbor Mrs. Patterson had brought by the day before. When he returned to the rocks, the dragon hadn't moved, but its head was turned toward him with an expression that might have been amusement. Marcus set up his portable brewing station on a flat section of rock and began the familiar ritual of making coffee. The dragon watched with what appeared to be fascination. "I am called Thexmoran," the dragon said as Marcus worked. "Though that is merely a convenient translation of my true name into your linguistic framework." "Marcus Chen," Marcus replied, measuring out coffee grounds with practiced precision. "And, yeah, I figured the translation software was doing some heavy lifting there. Thexmoran is a good name, though. Has a nice weight to it. You treat this encounter with remarkable casualness, Marcus Chen." Marcus shrugged as he lit the small heating element. "I spent 15 years in the Defense Corps. Saw action in the Centauri conflicts, the vegan trade wars, and about a dozen smaller skirmishes. After you've been shot at by plasma cannons and had to repair life support systems while under fire, sharing coffee with a polite dragon doesn't seem like such a big deal." "Polite," Thexmoran repeated, and that rumbling laughter returned. "Yes, I suppose I am being polite. It has been some time since I engaged in casual conversation." The coffee was nearly ready, filling the air with its rich aroma. Marcus had always found the smell of brewing coffee to be one of life's great pleasures, and apparently he wasn't alone. Thexmoran's nostrils flared, and his expression became thoughtful. "That scent is intriguing. I begin to understand why your species values this beverage so highly." "Wait until you taste it," Marcus said, pouring the coffee into 2 cups, one normal-sized for himself, and one much larger camping mug that would at least provide Thexmoran with a reasonable sample. He added some sweetener to his own cup and offered the dragon the choice of additions. Thexmoran accepted the large mug carefully in one clawed hand, examining it with the attention of a scientist studying a new phenomenon. He sniffed it delicately, then took a small sip. His eyes widened. "This is extraordinary. The complexity of flavors, the way it stimulates both the olfactory sensors and the taste receptors. I begin to see why your species built an entire cultural practice around this substance." "And that's just my regular morning blend," Marcus said, settling down on a rock across from the dragon. "Wait until you try some of the really good stuff. There's this roaster on New Geneva that makes a bean blend that'll change your life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun rise over the purple grasslands and drinking their coffee. Marcus found himself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the situation. There was something oddly peaceful about sharing a quiet morning with this ancient creature. "May I ask," Thexmoran said eventually, "what brought you to this remote world? Your military background suggests you could have settled anywhere in human space." "That's exactly why I came here," Marcus replied. "I spent 15 years surrounded by politics and conflicts and the constant noise of civilization. When I finally mustered out, I wanted someplace quiet. Someplace where I could think." "And, have you found what you were looking for in this quiet place?" Marcus considered the question as he sipped his coffee. "I think so. It's amazing how much clearer things become when you strip away all the distractions. Out here, you remember what actually matters." "And what matters to you, Marcus Chen?" "Simple things," Marcus said. "Good coffee. Honest work. People you can count on. The chance to watch a sunrise without worrying about whether someone's going to start shooting at you." He gestured at the landscape around them. "Peace." Thexmoran was quiet for a long time, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, more thoughtful. "Peace. Yes, I remember what that was like." Something in the dragon's tone caught Marcus's attention. "Remember? You say that like it's in the past. For me, it is. My life is complicated. I have responsibilities that do not allow for quiet mornings or simple pleasures." Thexmoran lifted his mug and took another sip of coffee. "This is the first time in decades that I have sat still long enough to simply watch a sunrise." "That's rough," Marcus said with genuine sympathy. "What do you do? If you don't mind me asking." Thexmoran's laugh was bitter this time. I manage resources. Coordinate activities across multiple systems. Resolve disputes between various factions. It is demanding work. Marcus nodded. Sounds like some kind of administration job. Those can be killers. All politics and bureaucracy, no time for yourself. Politics and bureaucracy, Thexmoran repeated slowly. Yes, that is an accurate description. Well, you're here now, Marcus said. However long you can stay, you might as well enjoy it. Life's too short to spend all your time stressed about work. Life is indeed short, Thexmoran agreed. Though perhaps not as short for my species as for yours. They finished their coffee as the sun climbed higher, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the dragon's company. Thexmoran was intelligent and well-spoken, with a dry sense of humor that emerged as he became more comfortable. He asked thoughtful questions about human culture and the settlement, and seemed genuinely interested in Marcus's answers. I should go, Thexmoran said finally, though he made no move to leave. I have obligations. Those obligations going to vanish if you take another hour or two? Marcus asked. Because I was thinking about making some breakfast. Mrs. Patterson brought by these pastries yesterday, and I've got some eggs and bacon back at the house. Nothing fancy, but it's good food. Thexmoran stared at him. You would continue to share your provisions with me? Why not? It's been a good morning. Best company I've had in months, actually. Most of the folks here are nice enough, but they're not much for conversation beyond the weather and crop yields. I cannot recall the last time someone offered me hospitality without expecting something in return. Who says I'm not expecting something in return? Marcus asked with a grin. You're interesting to talk to, and you appreciate good coffee. That's payment enough in my book. For a moment, Thexmoran looked almost vulnerable, his massive form somehow seeming smaller. Very well. I accept your invitation, Marcus Chen. But I should warn you, my presence here may not go unnoticed indefinitely. If others of your species discover me, then we'll deal with that if it happens, Marcus said, standing and gathering the coffee equipment. But right now, all I'm worried about is whether you prefer your eggs scrambled or over easy. As they walked back toward the settlement together, Marcus carrying his coffee gear and the dragon moving with surprising grace despite his size, Marcus reflected on how strange life could be. Yesterday, his biggest concern had been whether to repair the irrigation system for his small garden or wait until next week. Today, he was making breakfast for a dragon. But, somehow, it felt right. Natural, even. As if this was just another morning in Haven's Rest, and dragons dropping by for coffee was a perfectly normal occurrence. The settlement was starting to wake up as they approached. Marcus could see lights coming on in windows and smoke rising from a few chimneys. Soon, people would be venturing out to start their daily routines, and the presence of a 30-foot dragon in their midst would certainly cause some excitement. Are you concerned about your neighbors' reactions? Thexmoran asked, apparently following his thoughts. A little, Marcus admitted. But these are good people. Practical folks who came out here to build something peaceful. They're not going to panic and start shooting first thing. At worst, they'll be curious. And if they demand I leave? Marcus stopped walking and looked up at the dragon. Then, I'll ask you politely to respect their wishes. This is their home too. But I'm betting that once they meet you properly, once they see that you're not here to cause trouble, they'll be as interested in having you around as I am. Thexmoran studied him for a long moment. You have remarkable faith in your fellow humans. They've earned it, Marcus said simply. Come on, let's get that breakfast started before the whole colony is awakened, wanting to know what's going on. They made it to Marcus's house without incident, though Marcus noticed a few curtains twitching in windows as they passed. Thexmoran had to duck significantly to fit through the door, and, even then, his bulk filled most of Marcus's small kitchen. Cozy, Thexmoran commented, his head nearly touching the ceiling. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't exactly plan for dragon-sized guests when I picked out the furniture. Marcus began pulling ingredients from his refrigeration unit. You can squeeze back out to the patio if you want. There's more room there, and the morning's warming up nicely. They relocated to Marcus's small back patio, which overlooked his vegetable garden and provided a clear view of the grasslands beyond. Marcus set up his portable cooking unit and began preparing breakfast while Thex Moran settled carefully onto the patio decking, which creaked but held his weight. "Tell me about your garden," Thex Moran said as Marcus worked. "The plants are unfamiliar to me." "Mostly earth vegetables," Marcus replied, cracking eggs into a pan. "Tomatoes, peppers, squash, some herbs. The soil here is good for them with a little amendment, and the climate's not too different from where these crops originated. Simple stuff, but fresh vegetables make a big difference when you're living on the frontier." "You enjoy the cultivation process?" "I do. There's something satisfying about planting a seed and watching it grow into something useful. Plus, after 15 years of eating military rations, fresh food is kind of a luxury." The smell of bacon cooking began to fill the air, and Thex Moran's nostrils flared again. "Your species has developed sophisticated approaches to food preparation." "Wait until you try it," Marcus said, flipping the bacon with practiced ease. "Though I'm realizing I don't know much about draconic dietary needs. Is this going to agree with you? I am omnivorous, though my usual diet consists primarily of large aquatic creatures. However, I find myself curious about your cuisine. The aromas are quite appealing." Marcus plated the food, eggs, bacon, and some of Mrs. Patterson's pastries, and handed Thex Moran a portion on one of his larger serving dishes. The dragon accepted it with careful dignity and took a tentative bite. His eyes closed, and he made a sound of genuine pleasure. "Remarkable. The combination of flavors, the textures. I had not expected such sophistication from a frontier meal." "That's nothing," Marcus said with a grin. "You should taste what Mrs. Patterson can do when she really puts her mind to it. She was a professional chef on New Terra before she retired here." They ate in comfortable silence, enjoying the food and the peaceful morning. Marcus found himself studying his unusual guest with interest. Up close, Thex Moran was even more impressive than at a distance. His scales weren't just black, but a deep, iridescent color that shifted between midnight blue and forest green depending on how the light caught them. His claws were like polished obsidian, and his eyes held an intelligence that was almost unsettling in its depth. But there was also something else in those golden eyes, a weight that Marcus recognized. He had seen it in the mirror during his last few years of military service, and in the faces of other veterans who had carried too much responsibility for too long. "You know," Marcus said eventually, "I meant what I said earlier about work being too stressful. I've seen what it does to people when they don't take time to step back and breathe. Burns them out from the inside." Thex Moran looked at him sharply. "What makes you think I am burned out?" "Experience. You've got that look that people get when they've been carrying the world on their shoulders for too long. The way you talked about not watching a sunrise in decades? That's not healthy, no matter what species you are. The responsibilities I bear are not ones I can simply set aside for personal comfort." "I'm not talking about abandoning your responsibilities," Marcus said. "I'm talking about taking care of yourself so you can handle those responsibilities effectively. A leader who's running on empty isn't doing anyone any favors." Thex Moran's head drew back. "What makes you assume I am a leader?" Marcus shrugged. "Just a guess. The way you carry yourself, the way you talk about obligations and responsibilities, the fact that you clearly have resources and freedom of movement but feel constrained by duty. Plus, you said you coordinate activities across multiple systems and resolve disputes between factions. That sounds like leadership to me. Your powers of observation are notable. 15 years in the military teaches you to read people pretty quickly. Lives depend on knowing who you can count on and who's about to crack under pressure." Thex Moran was quiet for a long time, staring out at the grasslands. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "What would you do, Marcus Chen, if the weight of billions of lives rested on your decisions? If every choice you made could result in prosperity or suffering on a galactic scale?" "That's a hell of a hypothetical," Marcus said carefully. "But, honestly, I'd probably do exactly what you're doing, work myself into the ground trying to make the right choices for everyone. The difference is, I'd also know that I'm no good to anyone if I burn myself out completely. And, how does one avoid such burnout while maintaining the vigilance necessary to protect those lives? Marcus considered the question seriously. By remembering that you're human too. Or dragon, in your case. By taking time to remember what you're fighting to protect. By finding people you can trust to share the load. And, by accepting that you can't control everything, sometimes you have to trust that others will make good choices too. Trust, Thex Moran repeated. A luxury I have rarely been able to afford. It's not a luxury, Marcus said firmly. It's a necessity. No one can carry everything alone forever. Eventually, you either learn to delegate and trust others, or you break. They were interrupted by a soft cough from the direction of Marcus's house. Both turned to see Mrs. Patterson standing at the edge of the patio, her silver hair neatly pinned and her expression curious but not fearful. She was carrying a covered dish that smelled like fresh bread. "Good morning, Marcus," she said pleasantly. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all, Mrs. Patterson," Marcus replied, standing. "I'd like you to meet Thex Moran. He's visiting the area." Mrs. Patterson looked up at the dragon with the same expression she might use when meeting a new neighbor. "How lovely. Welcome to Haven's Rest, dear. I'm Eleanor Patterson." She held up her covered dish. "I brought some fresh cinnamon rolls. I always make too many for just myself." Thex Moran stared at the elderly woman for a moment, clearly taken aback by her casual acceptance of his presence. Thank you, Eleanor Patterson. Your kindness is unexpected." "Oh, nonsense," Mrs. Patterson said, setting the dish on Marcus's patio table and removing the cover to reveal perfectly golden cinnamon rolls. "Anyone who's sharing breakfast with Marcus must be good company. He's quite particular about such things." She helped herself to one of Marcus's patio chairs and settled in as if this was a perfectly normal morning social call. "So, Thex Moran, what brings you to our little corner of the galaxy? We don't get many visitors out here." "I was exploring the region," Thex Moran said carefully. "I had heard that this world was home to an interesting human settlement." "Interesting?" Mrs. Patterson laughed. "My dear, we're about as boring as they come. Unless you find crop rotation schedules and community garden planning fascinating." "I find the concept of voluntary isolation intriguing," Thex Moran said. "Your species typically seeks to expand and explore. This community represents a different approach." "Well, we all had our fill of excitement in our younger days," Mrs. Patterson said, offering him one of her cinnamon rolls. "Sometimes the greatest adventure is finding a place where you can just be yourself without all the noise and fuss of the wider galaxy." Thex Moran accepted the pastry with careful dignity and took a bite. His expression became one of pure wonder. "This is exceptional. The complexity of flavors, the texture, you are truly an artist, Eleanor Patterson." Mrs. Patterson beamed. "Aren't you a charmer? Marcus, where have you been hiding this one?" "We actually just met this morning," Marcus said, grinning at the surreal nature of the conversation. "He was watching the sunrise from my usual spot." "Oh, the outcropping past the East Gardens? Lovely view from there. Perfect spot for thinking." Mrs. Patterson turned back to Thex Moran. "Are you staying long? I do hope you'll join us for our weekly community dinner tomorrow night. We always love meeting new people." Thex Moran looked genuinely stunned. "You would invite me to join your community gathering?" "Of course, dear. Why wouldn't we? You seem perfectly pleasant, and any friend of Marcus's is welcome at our table." She paused, looking thoughtful. "Though we might need to set up some tables outside. Our community center wasn't really designed with your physiology in mind." Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. Mrs. Patterson was treating a 30-foot alien dragon like he was just another neighbor who had stopped by for coffee. It was so quintessentially human, the ability to adapt to the impossible and make it ordinary through simple kindness. I am honored by your invitation, Thexmoran said slowly. Though I fear my presence might cause alarm among other members of your community. Oh, pish, Mrs. Patterson waved dismissively. These people have seen worse things than a polite dragon. Half of them are veterans like Marcus, and the other half are stubborn enough to carve a life out of wilderness. They'll be curious, not scared. As if summoned by her words, more figures began appearing around the edges of the patio. Word had apparently spread that something interesting was happening at Marcus's place. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered, not pressing close, but clearly interested in the proceedings. Tom Bradley, the settlement's unofficial mayor, stepped forward first. He was a big man with calloused hands and a direct manner that had served him well as a construction foreman before retirement. Morning, Marcus. Mrs. Patterson. He nodded politely to Thexmoran. Sir. Thexmoran, the dragon replied gravely. I hope my presence does not cause concern. Well, it's certainly unusual, Tom admitted with a slight smile. But Mrs. Patterson seems comfortable enough, and Marcus doesn't rattle easily. I'm Tom Bradley. Welcome to Haven's Rest. One by one, the other colonists introduced themselves. Sarah Kim, the settlement's doctor. James Wright, who ran the general store. The Chen twins, no relation to Marcus, who managed the agricultural systems. Each greeting was polite, curious, but not fearful. Within half an hour, Thexmoran was surrounded by humans offering him food, asking about his travels, and treating him like an honored guest rather than a potentially dangerous alien. Marcus watched the dragon's reactions with interest. Thexmoran seemed genuinely overwhelmed by the casual acceptance and kindness he was receiving. His formal manner gradually relaxed as he realized that these humans truly meant him no harm and expected none in return. This is remarkable, Thexmoran said quietly to Marcus as Mrs. Patterson regaled him with stories about the settlement's early days. Your people's capacity for acceptance of the unknown is extraordinary. They're good folks, Marcus replied. Takes a certain kind of person to leave everything behind and build something new on a frontier world. People like that don't scare easily, and they don't judge quickly. In my experience, most species react to unfamiliar entities with suspicion or hostility. Maybe you've been dealing with the wrong people, Marcus suggested. Or maybe you've just been in situations where everyone was already on edge. Out here, we don't have anything worth fighting over, so we can afford to be friendly. Thexmoran was quiet for a moment, watching as Dr. Kim explained some local medical herbs to him with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a hobby. Perhaps you are correct. I have spent so much time mediating conflicts and managing crises that I had forgotten what it was like to encounter beings who were not already predisposed to hostility. Sounds like you definitely need this vacation, Marcus said. When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to, not because duty required it? I cannot remember. Then, you're definitely staying for dinner tomorrow night. Mrs. Patterson's right, the community dinners are something special. Good food, good conversation, and nobody trying to start a war or negotiate a treaty or whatever it is you usually deal with. I should not, you should, Marcus interrupted. Look around. These people like you. They're interested in you. They want to know about your culture, your experiences, your perspective on things. When's the last time anyone was interested in you as a person rather than as a resource coordinator or whatever? Thexmoran's golden eyes swept over the group of humans who were now debating the logistics of outdoor seating arrangements for the next evening. It has been a very long time. Then, it's settled. You're staying at least through tomorrow night. Marcus grinned. Besides, I'm curious to see how you handle Jim Wright's attempts to interest you in his collection of ancient Earth music. He's been trying to convert everyone to 20th century rock and roll since we got here. For the first time since Marcus had met him, Thexmoran smiled, a surprisingly gentle expression that transformed his entire face. Very well, Marcus-chan. I will extend my visit through your community dinner. Though I suspect this interlude will make returning to my regular duties even more difficult. Good, Marcus said firmly. Maybe difficult enough that you'll start making some changes to how you handle those duties. Life's too short to spend it all stressed and miserable, no matter how important the work is. As the morning wore on and the impromptu gathering evolved into a full-scale community breakfast, Marcus found himself reflecting on the strangeness of the situation. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been fixing a leaky pipe in his irrigation system. Now he was hosting what appeared to be a diplomatic reception for an alien visitor who was clearly more important than he was letting on. But, somehow, it all felt perfectly natural. Thex Moran fit into the easy rhythm of community life in Haven's Rest as if he had always been there. He listened attentively to stories about the settlement's founding, offered thoughtful observations about human nature, and even helped Mrs. Patterson with the dishes from the impromptu breakfast feast. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this encounter than simple chance. Thex Moran had mentioned watching the settlement for days before making contact, and his questions about human isolation and community building seemed oddly specific. But, whatever had brought the dragon to Haven's Rest, Marcus was glad he had come. It had been a good morning. The best morning he'd had in longer than he could remember. And, if he was reading the signs correctly, it was going to get even better. The future, for once, looked interesting. The next evening arrived with the kind of perfect weather that made Marcus grateful he'd chosen to settle on Haven's Rest. The temperature was warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the sweet scent of the purple grass across the settlement. The community had spent the day preparing for what had evolved from their usual weekly dinner into something approaching a festival in honor of their unusual guest. Tables had been arranged in the central square, covered with cheerful tablecloths that Mrs. Patterson had somehow produced from her seemingly endless supply of domestic resources. Strings of solar lights had been hung between the buildings, creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere as the sun began to set. The entire settlement had turned out, along with a few families from neighboring homesteads who had heard about the dragon visitor through the informal communication network that connected the scattered frontier communities. Thex Moran sat at the head of the longest table, having been unanimously voted into the position of guest of honor despite his protests that such treatment was unnecessary. Marcus watched with amusement as the dragon tried to navigate the complex social dynamics of a community potluck dinner. Mrs. Patterson had appointed herself as his guide to the various dishes, explaining the origins and preparation methods of each with the enthusiasm of someone sharing family secrets. "Now this is Sarah's famous cornbread," she was saying, placing a large slice on Thex Moran's plate. "She won't tell anyone the recipe, but I suspect there's honey and real butter involved. And this is Tom's barbecue sauce. He swears it's based on an old family recipe from Earth, but I think he makes it up as he goes along." "Your generosity is overwhelming," Thex Moran said, looking somewhat bewildered by the sheer quantity of food being offered to him. "I fear I cannot possibly sample everything without causing myself serious digestive distress." "Oh, you don't have to eat it all," Mrs. Patterson laughed. "Just try what appeals to you. Though I do insist you save room for dessert." The Miller family brought apple pie, and Martha's version is legendary around here. Marcus took a seat across from Thex Moran and began filling his own plate with familiar favorites. The dragon had spent the day exploring the settlement, accompanied by various colonists who seemed to take genuine pleasure in showing him around. He had helped Tom with some maintenance work on the community water system. Apparently his strength was as impressive as his size, and had spent a fascinating hour with Dr. Kim learning about human medical practices. "So what did you think of our little tour?" Marcus asked as he settled in with his dinner. "Educational," Thex Moran replied thoughtfully. "Your species has a remarkable ability to create functional communities with minimal resources and infrastructure. The efficiency of your agricultural systems is particularly impressive given the limitations of frontier technology." High praise coming from someone who coordinates activities across multiple star systems, Marcus said with a grin. "Though I'm betting the problems you usually deal with are a bit more complex than optimizing crop rotation schedules." Something flickered in Thex Moran's golden eyes. "Indeed. Though I am beginning to appreciate the value of simpler problems. There is something refreshing about challenges that can be solved through direct action rather than endless negotiation and compromise." "Sounds like politics," said Jim Wright, who was seated nearby. "I spent 30 years in municipal government back on New Terra. Same story, everything takes forever because everyone has an opinion and nobody wants to be the one to make the hard choices." "Yes," Thex Moran said quietly. "Politics. Marcus noticed that the dragon seemed to grow more subdued whenever the conversation touched on his work or responsibilities. Throughout the day, he had deflected most questions about his origins and purpose with polite generalities, always steering the discussion back to the colonists and their lives. It was skillfully done, but Marcus had spent enough time in military intelligence briefings to recognize evasion when he saw it. As the evening progressed and the conversation flowed around the tables, Marcus found himself studying their guest more carefully. There were subtle details that hadn't been apparent during their first meeting. The way Thex Moran held himself, with unconscious authority despite his efforts to appear casual. The precision of his movements, as if he was constantly aware of his own power and careful not to cause accidental damage. The depth of knowledge he displayed about galactic politics and trade relationships when he thought no one was paying close attention. Most telling of all was the way he listened. Marcus had seen that kind of focused attention before, in senior officers who had learned to extract valuable information from seemingly casual conversations. Thex Moran was learning about them, about human nature and community dynamics, with the thoroughness of someone who would need to use that knowledge later. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thex Moran wasn't just some wandering dragon taking a vacation from his administrative duties. He was conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence about human colonial settlements. The question was why. Marcus forced himself to continue eating normally while his mind raced through possibilities. The most obvious answer was that the draconic government was considering some kind of action regarding human expansion into the Outer Rim territories. That could range from trade negotiations to territorial disputes to outright military action. Given the isolationist reputation of the draconic species, none of those options were particularly encouraging. But, if that was the case, why reveal himself at all? A dragon of Thex Moran's obvious capabilities could easily observe the settlement from a distance without making contact. The fact that he had approached Marcus, accepted hospitality, and allowed himself to become integrated into the community suggested something more complex than simple spying. Marcus's speculation was interrupted by Mrs. Patterson tapping her fork against her glass to get everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, rising from her seat with the dignity that came from a lifetime of hosting dinner parties. "To our new friend Thex Moran, who has reminded us that the galaxy is full of interesting people worth getting to know. And to the continued prosperity of our little community." "Here, here," called out Tom Bradley, raising his own glass. The sentiment was echoed around the tables as the colonists lifted their drinks in salute. Thex Moran looked genuinely moved by the gesture. "Thank you. All of you. This has been an honor I did not expect and certainly do not deserve." "Nonsense," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You've been delightful company, and you helped Tom fix that pump that's been giving us trouble for weeks. That's worth a toast in any civilization." As the evening wound down and the colonists began cleaning up, Marcus found himself walking with Thex Moran toward the edge of the settlement. The dragon had been quiet since the toast, and his expression was troubled. "Penny for your thoughts," Marcus said, using an old Earth idiom that Thex Moran had encountered earlier in the day. "I have been thinking about deception," Thex Moran replied slowly. "About the weight of lies, even those told with good intentions." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of deceptions?" Thex Moran stopped walking and turned to face him directly. In the light of the settlement's lamps, his scales seemed to shimmer with an inner luminescence. "Marcus Chen, you are an intelligent man with significant military experience. You have been watching me carefully tonight. What conclusions have you drawn?" The direct question caught Marcus off guard, but he decided to respond with equal honesty. "I think you're more important than you've let on. I think you're here on official business of some kind, probably intelligence gathering. And I think you're struggling with whatever instructions brought you here because you genuinely like us." Thex Moran nodded slowly. "Your assessment is largely accurate. Though the situation is more complex than you realize. Care to enlighten me?" "That depends. Are you prepared to hear information that could potentially place your community in danger?" Marcus felt his blood turn cold. "What kind of danger?" Thex Moran was silent for a long moment, his golden eyes fixed on the stars above. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret.
Tell me, Marcus Chen, what do you know about the Draconic Empire?
Just the basics. Isolationist species, advanced technology, territorial about their space. They've had minimal contact with the Galactic Council, but relations are officially neutral. All true, as far as it goes. But there are aspects of our society that are not widely known among other species. Thex Moran resumed walking, his pace slow and deliberate.
We are not merely isolationist by choice. We are isolationist by necessity. My people are not well suited to close contact with other species. What do you mean?
We are apex predators, Marcus. Both physically and intellectually. When my ancestors first encountered other sapient species, the results were unfortunate.
We dominated rather than cooperated.
We conquered rather than traded. We ruled rather than negotiated.
Marcus felt a growing sense of unease.
You're talking about this in the past tense.
Because it is past.
We learned, eventually, that such behavior was ultimately self-destructive. A galaxy of subjects is less prosperous than a galaxy of partners. But the learning process was difficult. For everyone involved. They had reached the edge of the settlement now, where the lights faded and the purple grasslands stretched away into darkness. Thex Moran settled himself on the ground with a weariness that seemed to encompass more than just physical fatigue. The Draconic Empire withdrew from galactic politics 3 centuries ago, he continued. We established our territorial boundaries and maintained them strictly. No expansion, but also no retreat. We govern our own space and avoid entangling ourselves in the affairs of others. That sounds like a reasonable policy, Marcus said carefully.
It was. Until recent developments forced us to reconsider our position. Thex Moran's voice became grimmer. Human expansion has been aggressive.
Your species has colonized over 2,000 worlds in the past century, with new settlements established every month. Most of these are in previously unclaimed space, which presents no problem.
But some. Marcus's stomach dropped. Some are in territory you consider yours. Not exactly.
The boundaries we established are clear and have been respected.
But human settlements have been established in buffer zones that we consider strategically vital to our security.
Systems that could serve as staging areas for deeper incursions into our space.
Including this one? Thex Moran met his eyes directly.
Haven's Rest is located in a system that controls access to 3 major hyperspace routes leading into the heart of Draconic territory. From a military perspective, it is an ideal location for a forward operating base. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. You think we're scouts for some kind of military expansion?
That was the initial assessment, yes.
Intelligence reports indicated that this settlement was established by former military personnel with significant combat experience. The logical conclusion was that this was a covert military outpost disguising itself as a civilian colony. Marcus stared at the dragon in shock.
That's insane. We're farmers and shopkeepers and retirees.
The most military action we see around here is organizing the community watch schedule.
I know that now,
Thex Moran said quietly. But intelligence reports can be misleading, especially when filtered through the assumptions and prejudices of those who have never experienced anything beyond conflict and competition.
So what's your official mission here?
Assess the threat level?
Recommend military action? Thex Moran was silent for a long moment.
When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I am Thex Moran of the 73rd lineage, Supreme Commander of the Draconic Imperial Fleet, and Emperor of the Draconic Empire. I came here to determine whether this settlement represented a sufficient threat to warrant preemptive action.
The words hung in the air between them like an unexploded bomb.
Marcus felt the world shift around him as the full implications of the revelation sank in. The dragon he had been sharing coffee with, the alien who had helped fix their water pump and charmed Mrs. Patterson with his appreciation for cinnamon rolls, was the ruler of one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Emperor, Marcus repeated numbly.
Yes. And the preemptive action you're talking about.
Complete destruction of the settlement and all inhabitants, followed by the establishment of a draconic monitoring station to prevent future incursions.
Marcus felt like he was falling into a cold, dark pit. You came here to decide whether to kill us all. That was the recommendation of my military advisors, yes.
A surgical strike to eliminate a potential threat before it could develop into something more dangerous. Clean, efficient, and necessary for the security of the Empire.
But you didn't.
Marcus's voice was hollow.
You made contact instead. Thexmoran's laugh was bitter. A moment of weakness, perhaps. Or curiosity.
I had read the intelligence reports, studied the tactical assessments, reviewed the strategic implications. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: this settlement represented a clear and present danger that required immediate elimination.
So what changed your mind? You offered me coffee.
The simple statement was so unexpected that Marcus almost laughed despite the horror of the situation.
Coffee? For 3 days, I observed your settlement from concealment.
I watched your people go about their daily routines. I monitored your communications, analyzed your defensive capabilities, assessed your strategic value. Everything I saw confirmed the threat assessment.
Former military personnel establishing a well-organized settlement in a strategically vital location. Thexmoran's voice became softer, more thoughtful. But then, I saw you, alone on that outcropping, watching the sunrise. There was something about your posture, your expression, that didn't match the profile of a military operative. You looked peaceful. Content.
Like someone who had found what they were looking for and had no desire to go looking for trouble.
So you approached me.
I told myself I was conducting a final reconnaissance, gathering intelligence about your community's true intentions.
But, I think part of me simply wanted to understand. How could a veteran of multiple conflicts seem so at peace? How could someone with your background choose isolation over influence?
Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing the magnitude of what he had learned. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady despite the chaos in his mind.
And, now? Have you made your decision about whether we're a threat? Thexmoran's golden eyes were infinitely sad.
You are the greatest threat my empire has ever faced, Marcus Chen.
What?
Marcus's voice cracked with disbelief.
Not militarily, Thexmoran clarified quickly. You couldn't threaten a single draconic patrol ship, much less our entire fleet.
But, what you represent, what your community has shown me, that is a threat to everything my people believe about the nature of existence.
I don't understand. My species has built our entire civilization on the assumption that all sapient life is fundamentally competitive.
That peace is merely the absence of war, not a positive state in itself.
That cooperation is a temporary alliance between enemies who will inevitably betray each other when circumstances change.
Thexmoran gestured toward the lights of the settlement behind them. But, you have created something that contradicts those assumptions. A community based on trust, cooperation, and genuine mutual care. Former soldiers who have laid down their weapons not from weakness, but from strength. People who have everything they need and, therefore, want nothing more than to share what they have with others.
That's not threatening, Marcus protested. That's just human. Exactly.
And if humans can create this kind of community, then perhaps my people can as well.
Perhaps the isolation we have maintained for centuries is not necessary.
Perhaps we have been denying ourselves the possibility of genuine connection with others because we were afraid to discover that our fundamental assumptions about the universe were wrong.
Understanding began to dawn on Marcus.
You're afraid that if your people learn about communities like ours, they'll want something different than what the Empire currently offers them. I am afraid that everything I have spent my life defending may be built on lies, Thexmoran said quietly. I am afraid that the isolation I have maintained to protect my people has actually been imprisoning them.
I am afraid that I have been the greatest enemy of my own species' happiness.
They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Marcus found himself struggling to process the magnitude of the situation. The continued existence of everyone he cared about hung in the balance of one dragon's internal conflict between duty and possibility.
What happens now? Marcus asked eventually. I don't know, Thexmoran admitted. I am expected to return within the next few days with my assessment and recommendations. The Imperial Council is waiting for my decision about whether to authorize the destruction of this settlement and others like it. And what decision are you going to make? Thexmoran was quiet for a long moment. That depends on you, I think. Me? Tomorrow, I return to my ship and begin the journey home. I will have approximately 2 weeks to compose my final report before I must present it to the Council. 2 weeks to decide the fate of thousands of human colonies and, potentially, the future direction of the Draconic Empire. I still don't see how I factor into this. Thexmoran looked at him directly. Come with me. Marcus stared at the dragon in shock. What? Join me for the journey home. See the Empire through the eyes of an outsider. Meet my people, experience our civilization, and help me understand whether there is truly a path forward that doesn't require us to choose between security and connection. You want me to come with you to the Draconic Empire? As what, exactly? As a cultural ambassador, perhaps. Or a consultant on interspecies relations. The exact title is less important than the perspective you would provide. Marcus's mind reeled. This is crazy. I'm not a diplomat or a politician. I'm just a retired soldier who grows vegetables and makes coffee. Yes, Thexmoran said with something that might have been a smile. And that is exactly why your perspective is valuable. My advisors are all politicians and military strategists who see everything in terms of threats and opportunities. I need someone who understands the value of simple peace. And if I refuse? Then, I return alone and must rely on my own judgment to make decisions that will affect billions of lives. Given my recent track record of certainty followed by complete reversal of opinion, I am not confident in my ability to choose wisely. The weight of the decision settled on Marcus's shoulders like a physical burden. Everything he had built here in Haven's Rest, his quiet life, his garden, his place in the community, would have to be left behind. He would be venturing into unknown territory with no guarantee of success and no clear idea of what success would even look like. But the alternative was unthinkable. If Thexmoran returned alone and decided that human expansion represented an intolerable threat, thousands of colonies could be wiped out without warning. Millions of people who had done nothing more threatening than plant crops and build homes would die because their very existence challenged someone else's worldview. If I come with you, Marcus said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you won't just kill me once you get what you need? None, Thexmoran admitted. I can offer you my word, but you have no way to verify its worth. You would be placing your life entirely in my hands, trusting in the good faith of someone who came here prepared to authorize genocide. That's not exactly reassuring. I cannot make this decision easy for you, Marcus Chen. I can only tell you that the alternative, leaving the fate of your species to my unguided judgment, may be worse. Marcus looked back at the settlement, at the warm lights and the evidence of the life he had built here. Mrs. Patterson would worry about him. Tom Bradley would have questions about why he had left so suddenly. His garden would need tending, and his house would sit empty gathering dust. But those concerns seemed insignificant compared to the larger stakes at play. If there was even a small chance that his presence could prevent a catastrophic war or help build a bridge between two civilizations, didn't he have an obligation to take that chance? How long would this take, he asked finally. The journey to the Imperial capital will take 2 weeks. I would need you to remain there for at least several months while I present my findings to the Council and work to build support for a new approach to human relations. After that, it depends on how events unfold. Months, Marcus repeated. Maybe longer. Possibly much longer, if you choose to become a permanent ambassador. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to imagine what his life might look like as a human representative to an alien empire. No quiet mornings with coffee and sunrises. No simple conversations with neighbors about crop yields and weather patterns. Instead, there would be constant pressure, political maneuvering, and the knowledge that every word he spoke could have consequences for millions of lives. It sounded like a nightmare. It sounded exactly like the kind of responsibility he had come to Haven's Rest to escape. But it also sounded necessary. I have conditions, Marcus said finally. Name them.
First, I want guarantees for the safety of this settlement and others like it while we're working on a solution. No preemptive strikes while negotiations are ongoing.
Agreed. Second, I want the right to communicate with my people here. They deserve to know that I'm alive and working on their behalf.
That may be more difficult to arrange, but I will do what I can. Third, if this doesn't work out, if we can't find a solution that satisfies your council, I want safe passage home before any military action begins.
Thex Moran hesitated. That is a promise I may not be able to keep.
Once events begin moving, I may not have the authority to protect individual humans, even those under my direct protection.
Then, we'd better make sure it works out, Marcus said grimly.
They shook hands, or rather, Marcus shook one of Thex Moran's claws to seal the agreement. The dragon's scaled appendage was warm and, surprisingly gentle, careful not to accidentally injure the fragile human.
I will return tomorrow at sunset to collect you, Thex Moran said.
I suggest you use the time to put your affairs in order and explain the situation to your community leaders. They should be prepared for the possibility that human-draconic relations may become complicated in the near future.
What should I tell them about where I'm going? The truth, if you think they can handle it.
Or as much of the truth as you feel comfortable sharing. Marcus nodded, though his mind was already racing with the difficulty of explaining the situation to his neighbors.
How did you tell people that their morning coffee companion was actually an alien emperor who had been contemplating their annihilation? How did you explain that their continued existence depended on one man's ability to convince a civilization of apex predators that humans were worth keeping around? Marcus, Thex Moran said as he prepared to leave.
I want you to know that regardless of what happens next, meeting you and your community has been significant. You have given me hope that there might be alternatives to the path my people have followed for so long. That alone makes this venture worthwhile.
Let's hope your council sees it the same way, Marcus replied.
As he watched the dragon disappear into the darkness, Marcus felt the weight of the coming challenge settle around him like a heavy cloak. Tomorrow, his quiet life would end and something much more dangerous would begin. He only hoped he was strong enough to handle what lay ahead, and wise enough to avoid making things worse than they already were. The future of two civilizations might depend on his ability to bridge the gap between a retired soldier's simple desire for peace and an emperor's complex struggle with duty, tradition, and the possibility of change.
No pressure at all.
The imperial capital of Zethkalar was unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. As Thex Moran's personal transport descended through layers of atmospheric traffic control, Marcus pressed his face to the observation port and tried to process the sheer scale of what he was seeing. The city stretched from horizon to horizon, a sprawling metropolis of crystal spires and flowing architecture that seemed to grow from the planet's surface like some massive organic structure.
Impressive, isn't it?
Thex Moran's voice carried a note of pride despite his recent doubts about his civilization. 20 billion inhabitants, and it has been continuously occupied for over 4,000 years. The central district you can see below us contains structures that predate our contact with other species by several millennia. Marcus tried to maintain his composure, but the magnitude of the Draconic Empire's capital was overwhelming. Each individual spire was larger than any building he had ever seen, and there were thousands of them stretching away into the distance. Flying vehicles moved between them in orderly streams that suggested traffic management on a scale that boggled the human mind.
It's incredible, Marcus admitted. I'm starting to understand why your people might see human colonies as insignificant. This makes Earth's largest cities look like frontier outposts. Size is not everything, Thex Moran replied thoughtfully.
I have been thinking about your settlement during our journey, and I find myself wondering whether we have confused complexity with advancement, scale with success.
The 2 weeks of travel had been educational for both of them.
Marcus had learned about the structure of the Draconic Empire, its history, and the intricate web of traditions and obligations that governed its society. Thex Moran had spent hours questioning Marcus about human nature, community dynamics, and the concept of voluntary simplicity that seemed so foreign to Draconic thinking. They had also become genuine friends. Stripped of the need to maintain diplomatic pretenses during their long journey, both had relaxed into more natural versions of themselves. Marcus discovered that beneath the weight of imperial responsibility, Thex Moran possessed a dry sense of humor and a genuine intellectual curiosity about the universe. Thex Moran found that Marcus's military background had given him insights into leadership and responsibility that transcended species barriers. "Remember," Thex Moran said as they approached the landing platform reserved for the Emperor's personal use, "you are here as my guest and advisor. The Council knows only that I am bringing a human representative to provide perspective on recent developments. They do not know the details of what I discovered on Haven's Rest.
And they definitely don't know that you originally went there to evaluate it for destruction? That information remains classified under my personal authority. For now." Thex Moran's tone became more serious. "The formal presentation to the Council is scheduled for 3 days from now.
That gives us time to prepare your input and for you to observe our governmental processes. But, Marcus, I must warn you, some of my advisors are likely to be hostile to your presence."
"Hostile how? Are we talking about professional skepticism or actual physical danger?" "Most likely the former, though the distinction can be academic where draconic politics are concerned. My people respect strength and authority above all else. A single human, no matter how insightful, may be seen as an insignificant voice attempting to influence matters far beyond his understanding." The transport settled onto the landing platform with barely a whisper of displaced air. Through the viewports, Marcus could see dozens of figures waiting to greet them, all dragons, ranging in size from merely large to absolutely enormous. Their scales showed a variety of colors and patterns, and their postures conveyed a complex hierarchy of relationships that Marcus couldn't begin to interpret. "Showtime," he muttered under his breath. "Indeed.
Remember, maintain confidence but show appropriate respect.
Do not attempt to initiate physical contact unless invited to do so.
And, whatever happens, do not show fear. My people can literally smell fear, and they will interpret it as weakness."
"Anything else I should know?"
"Yes. The dragon approaching us now is General Vexthera, Supreme Commander of our military forces and my primary advisor on strategic matters.
She was the one who originally recommended the preemptive strikes against human colonies."
Marcus felt his blood chill.
"The one who wanted to wipe us out." "The very same.
She is also one of the most intelligent beings I have ever encountered, with a perfect record of strategic assessments over the past 2 centuries.
If anyone is going to challenge your presence here, it will be her."
The transport's hatch opened with a soft hiss, and Marcus followed Thex Moran down the ramp onto the platform. The scale of everything around him was even more overwhelming up close. The nearest dragons were each at least as large as Thex Moran, and several were significantly larger. Marcus felt like an insect that had somehow stumbled into a gathering of titans.
General Vexthera stepped forward as they approached the waiting group.
She was slightly smaller than Thex Moran but carried herself with an unmistakable air of military authority. Her scales were a deep red that shifted to black at the edges, and her golden eyes held an intelligence that was both brilliant and utterly cold. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said, her voice carrying the crisp precision of a career military officer.
"Welcome home. Your mission was successful?"
"In ways I did not anticipate, General. Allow me to present Marcus Chen, former military officer of the Terran Defense Corps and current representative of the human colonial communities." Vexthera's gaze shifted to Marcus, and he felt like he was being examined by a very large, very dangerous predator.
"The human is smaller than I expected. But no less significant for that," Thex Moran replied smoothly. "I have found his insights into human society to be extremely valuable." "I see."
Vexthera's tone suggested she saw quite a lot, and most of it concerned her.
"Welcome to Zeth Kaler, Marcus Chen. I trust you will find your visit educational."
"Thank you, General," Marcus replied, proud that his voice remained steady. "I'm honored to be here and grateful for the opportunity to speak for my people." "Yes, we shall see how honored you remain after experiencing our hospitality."
The comment could have been interpreted as either a polite welcome or a veiled threat.
Marcus suspected it was both. The next few hours were a blur of introductions and formal ceremonies. Marcus was presented to the Imperial Council, a gathering of the most powerful dragons in the Empire. Each introduction was a careful dance of protocol and political positioning that left Marcus feeling like he was walking through a minefield blindfolded.
The dragons he met fell into several distinct categories.
There were the military leaders like Vexthera, who viewed him with barely concealed suspicion and saw his presence as evidence of their emperor's dangerous sentimentality. There were the administrators and bureaucrats, who seemed more interested in the practical implications of improved human relations than in any philosophical questions about the nature of civilization. And there were the scholars and scientists, who peppered him with questions about human culture and technology with the enthusiasm of researchers who had discovered a new species.
Throughout it all, Thex Moran remained at his side, smoothly navigating the complex social currents and ensuring that Marcus was treated with appropriate respect. It was clear that the Emperor's protection was the only thing standing between Marcus and some very uncomfortable conversations with dragons who viewed humans as, at best, a minor irritation to be managed. As the formal receptions finally wound down, Thex Moran guided Marcus through a series of corridors that seemed to stretch for miles. The architecture was flowing and organic, with surfaces that curved and twisted in ways that suggested they had been grown rather than built. Bioluminescent panels provided soft lighting that shifted in color and intensity as they moved, creating an environment that was both beautiful and alien. "Your quarters are in the diplomatic wing," Thex Moran explained as they walked.
"You'll have privacy there, and the security systems will ensure that you're not disturbed by any overly curious visitors."
"I take it some of your people would like to have a private conversation with me?"
"Several, for various reasons.
Some are genuinely interested in learning more about human culture.
Others are concerned about the precedent of allowing an alien to influence imperial policy.
And a few."
Thex Moran's voice became grimmer, "believe that any human who sets foot in the capital represents a security breach that should be addressed permanently."
"Addressed permanently," Marcus repeated. "That's a euphemism for assassination, isn't it?" "I'm afraid so.
But don't worry, my personal protection extends to you while you remain in the capital.
No one would dare harm a guest under my direct protection." "What about when I leave the capital?"
"That will depend on how well the next few days go." Marcus's quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms that would have been luxurious by any standard, though clearly designed for occupants considerably larger than humans. The main chamber featured a ceiling that soared 40 feet overhead and furniture that had been hastily scaled down to human proportions. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below, where the lights of billions of inhabitants created patterns that shifted and flowed like a living constellation.
"Get some rest," Thex Moran advised.
"Tomorrow we begin your real education about the Draconic Empire. You'll need to understand our society's structure and our people's psychology if you're going to speak effectively to the council."
"Any advice on what I should emphasize?"
"Strength. Everything in Draconic culture comes down to strength, military strength, economic strength, intellectual strength, the strength of will to enforce one's decisions. If you can frame human communities as a source of strength rather than weakness, you'll have their attention."
"And if I can't?"
"Then, we'll both learn whether my protection is sufficient to get you safely home." Marcus slept poorly that night, his dreams filled with images of enormous predators and the weight of responsibility for millions of lives he would never meet. When morning came, marked by the artificial lighting systems rather than any visible sunrise in the urban environment, he forced himself through a routine of exercises and meditation that had served him well during his military years. The day began with a guided tour of the Imperial complex, conducted by a scholarly dragon named Kethminer who seemed genuinely delighted to have a human to educate. Marcus learned about the history of the Draconic Empire, its governmental structure, and the philosophical principles that had guided its development for thousands of years. "The fundamental organizing principle of our society," Kethminer explained as they moved through a vast library containing the accumulated knowledge of millennia, "is the concept of earned dominance. Those who prove themselves strongest, wisest, and most capable naturally rise to positions of authority. This creates a meritocracy based on objective measures of ability rather than arbitrary factors like inheritance or popularity."
"It sounds efficient," Marcus acknowledged, "but what happens to those who aren't at the top of the hierarchy?"
"In human societies, we try to ensure that even the weakest members have value and protection."
"An interesting approach, but ultimately inefficient."
"Resources devoted to supporting the weak are resources that cannot be used to strengthen the strong." Over time, this leads to societal decline as the overall capability of the population decreases. Marcus bit back his first response, which would have been to point out that some of humanity's greatest contributions had come from individuals who might have been considered weak by draconic standards. Instead, he filed the information away for later consideration. Understanding how dragons thought about strength and hierarchy would be crucial to presenting human communities in terms they could appreciate. The tour continued through various governmental departments, each more impressive than the last. Marcus saw the vast computing centers that managed interstellar trade and communication, the military command centers that coordinated the activities of fleets spanning dozens of star systems, and the research facilities where dragon scientists worked on projects that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Everything was designed on a scale that emphasized the power and reach of the empire. Marcus began to understand why dragons might see human colonies as insignificant threats. From their perspective, humanity's entire interstellar civilization was a minor development on the periphery of their awareness. But he also began to see potential weaknesses in the draconic approach. The emphasis on individual dominance and hierarchical competition seemed to create significant inefficiencies in cooperation. Projects required extensive coordination between dragons who were constantly positioning themselves for advantage over their colleagues. Decision-making processes were slowed by the need for each participant to demonstrate their intellectual superiority. Most telling of all was the social isolation he observed. Dragons seemed to have few genuine friendships or collaborative relationships. They interacted primarily through formal protocols that emphasized status and power rather than personal connection. The loneliness he had sensed in Thex Moran was apparently a systemic feature of their society. That evening, Marcus shared his observations with the Emperor as they dined in Thex Moran's private chambers. The meal itself was an education, elaborate dishes prepared with ingredients from across the galaxy, served in a setting that spoke of wealth and power accumulated over centuries. "You've noticed our social isolation," Thex Moran said after Marcus had carefully described his impressions of the day. "It's hard to miss. Everyone I met today was impressive individually, but I didn't see much evidence of the kind of teamwork that makes human communities effective. Everything seems to be about individual achievement rather than group success." An accurate assessment. It is one of the prices we pay for our meritocratic system. Competition drives excellence, but it also makes genuine cooperation difficult. "Is that why you were so interested in our community dinner?" Marcus asked. "The way people work together without constantly jockeying for position?" "Partly. But also the simple pleasure you all seem to take in each other's company." "When was the last time you saw dragons gather purely for the enjoyment of social interaction?" Marcus thought about it. "I haven't, actually. Every gathering I've seen has been about business or ceremony or demonstration of status. Nothing that looked like people just enjoying being together." "Because we don't." "Oh, we have formal social events and ceremonial gatherings, but genuine friendship, the kind of easy companionship I witnessed in your settlement, is extremely rare among my people. We are too competitive, too concerned with maintaining our individual positions to allow for the kind of vulnerability that true friendship requires." "That sounds lonely," Marcus said quietly. "It is. More lonely than I realized until I experienced the alternative." Thex Moran's voice carried a weight of centuries. "You asked me once when I had last done something simply because I wanted to, rather than because duty required it. The truth is, I'm not sure I know how to want things for their own sake anymore." They ate in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Marcus found himself thinking about Mrs. Patterson's casual kindness, Tom Bradley's straightforward friendship, the easy camaraderie of the community dinners. Simple human connections that these powerful, intelligent dragons had somehow never learned to create. "What happens if the council rejects your recommendations?" Marcus asked eventually. "Then, we proceed with the original plan. Military strikes against the most strategically significant human colonies, followed by the establishment of buffer zones to prevent further expansion toward our territory." "Including Haven's Rest?" "Haven's Rest would be among the first targets eliminated." Marcus felt a familiar cold weight in his stomach. "How many colonies are we talking about?" "Approximately 300 settlements in systems considered strategically significant. The population affected would be roughly 2 million humans. 2 million lives hanging in the balance of a political decision made by beings who measured friendship in terms of strategic advantage. Marcus tried to imagine explaining that to Mrs. Patterson, to Tom Bradley, to all the good people who had shared their simple dinner with an alien visitor and asked for nothing in return except the pleasure of his company. There has to be another way, Marcus said. Perhaps. That is what we must discover in the next 2 days. The formal presentation to the Imperial Council was scheduled for the following morning. Marcus spent the night reviewing his notes and trying to organize his thoughts into something approaching a coherent argument. The challenge was presenting human communities as sources of strength rather than threats, while also acknowledging the legitimate security concerns of the Empire. He was still working on his presentation when Thexmoran arrived early the next morning, accompanied by General Vexthera and several other military officials. The Dragon General's expression was even grimmer than usual. "We have a problem," she announced without preamble. Intelligence reports indicate that 3 additional human colonies have been established in border systems during the past month. The expansion pattern suggests a coordinated effort to establish forward positions near our territory. Marcus felt his heart sink. What kind of colonies? Military or civilian? Unknown at this time. But the timing is suspicious. It suggests that your species may be accelerating expansion efforts in response to some perceived threat or opportunity. Or, Marcus said carefully, it could be exactly what it appears to be: civilian families looking for new places to build homes. Human expansion has been consistent for decades. It's not necessarily a response to anything your people have done. Nevertheless, Vexthera continued, the Council is now even more concerned.